Hello everyone, and welcome to another News Coolum video and another plug side chat. It's been a while, but EVgo recently announced that they were going to be adding Tesla standard connection plugs to their DC fast charging locations. And some of you have asked me for my take on it, what I think about it. And you know, I actually have a number of mixed feelings regarding adding the Tesla standard. And in fact, I actually published a story several days before that news broke about some of the things that I think Tesla needed to do in order to compensate for some of the holiday backlogs that they were seeing at their superchargers, and really compensate for the fact that they're now selling higher volume, lower margin cars that aren't going to pay for basically the same number of chargers that some of Tesla's more expensive cars were paying for. So if you look at the original Supercharger network, when you're having people pay $150,000, $200,000 for a car, there's plenty of margin in there to pay for a supercharger or to maybe per vehicle that you sell. But at this point, you're selling Model 3s for $40,000. One Model 3 isn't going to pay for a supercharger. 10 Model 3s might not pay for a single supercharger. So Tesla's going to run into an issue now where they're producing vehicles faster than they can support them with their sort of private proprietary charging network. And that's really where, in my opinion, Tesla needed to partner with a public charging provider. Now, this isn't exactly what I had envisioned. It works along the same lines, but really I think Tesla and say EVgo, they would benefit from a partnership where they're building new charging sites and they're partnering and sharing permitting costs and things like that. So really it reduces their overall cost to put a new site into place, and Tesla wins by getting a wider distribution of their chargers than they currently have, and EVgo wins by just, getting more chargers out there. But in this case, this is a little bit different. This is essentially just adding a standard to a charger. And on the surface, I don't like it in the sense that, it feels like we're moving further away from a sort of unified standard. But on the same hand, you're really not, because they're talking about adding a standard to an existing charger. You look at gas stations, right? It's not uncommon to see 2 or 3 different nozzles on a single pump with different grades of gasoline versus diesel, E85 or whatever. So that pump can serve basically any vehicle that shows up. The only difference is which nozzle that vehicle chooses to use. So, if we arrive at a universal standard by having every charger carry every standard that's being used, then that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it really isn't impeding this standardization and this single unified standard. But on the same token, though, the issue I have is that Tesla offers zero reciprocity. They've made it very clear through their actions. Now, this is contrary to what they say, but they've made it very clear through their actions that they have no interest in sharing their charging network or resources with any other electric vehicles. And this is evidenced by how they acted in Europe, where their Tesla Model 3 owners are now charging on chargers that were literally paid for by other automakers. These other automakers invested into those charging networks like Ionity, and yet despite the fact that the superchargers in Europe now have CCS standard plugs, none of those other automakers' vehicles are allowed to charge on those superchargers. So there's zero reciprocity. The same is going to happen here. EVgo can add those heads, those Tesla standard heads to their chargers, but nobody should ever expect Tesla to add any other charging heads to their superchargers, and if they do, it's because their cars have adopted that standard and nobody else is going to be able to go back and use those chargers. So that's sort of my issue with this, is there's a risk in creating a sort of an imbalance in the charging network. And just from a basic site perspective, if you show up and there's a charger that only you can use and another charger that anybody else can use, you should always prioritize the one that only you can use, because it leaves the most options open for the next vehicle. If they're not using their superchargers, they're using the public chargers, but there's no chance for the vehicles that they're now blocking from using those chargers to use the site that they chose not to use. So it creates an imbalance, and it could in some ways make things worse. The other question I have is just from EVgo on a logistics standpoint. We're still waiting for them to update sites that have standalone CHAdeMO chargers to install chargers with new dual standard. Now they're going to be installing new chargers with tri-standard, but it's been years, right? And there are still sites that a lot of people would find useful, but they have to pass on because one of the chargers is CHAdeMO only. I'm perfectly fine with Tesla owners using the public charging infrastructure. In fact, I really want them to. I think there's a lot of benefits for everybody involved. I think companies like EVgo, ChargePoint, Electrify America, they'll find it much easier to fund their network when you have an extra 100, 200, 300,000 vehicles on the road that are able to use those chargers. So I have no problem with that at all. Again, though, my main issue is just how are we going to balance out the network when you have one of the largest charging providers in the country refusing to serve anybody other than their own vehicle type. And that's the issue that I have. Now, the other consideration too is how much are these Tesla owners really going to want to use these chargers? In some cases they might. EVgo is talking about rolling this out initially in the Bay Area. You have a huge population of electric vehicles, and a lot of times they just want access to a parking space, and if they can't plug in, well, then they could get ticketed or cited, but now you're giving them the option to plug in so they can take the spot anyway. And yeah, that does bring up another question about actual need versus just, you know, wanting to take advantage of your status as having an electric car, and that's a whole nother argument, and I think it could be an issue as well. But outside of those crowded areas, I really don't know how much of a use Tesla owners are going to see for this option, right? They are going to prioritize the superchargers anyway. Those who actually know about the public charging infrastructure and know how to use it have EVgo accounts and whatnot. Typically, they already have a CHAdeMO adapter, and they're going to be charging at the same speed regardless. So all this is doing is, if they happen to have forgotten their CHAdeMO adapter, or they just happen to not have one, well, then that's really the only thing it's doing, is it's allowing those Tesla owners to plug into these 50 kilowatt chargers without needing an adapter in between. But otherwise, for the most part, these are chargers that Tesla owners could have already been using. And it's not going to help Tesla owners in terms of having access to faster chargers, because, well, most of EVgo's chargers are still either 100 amp or 125 amp, which again is basically the same speed as that CHAdeMO to Tesla adapter that they currently have. This isn't going to help them access things like the Electrify America network, where they'd actually see faster charging speeds than what they currently see on most of their superchargers. So they're not going to be able to charge at 180 kilowatts on most of these EVgo chargers that are having Tesla adapters put on them. So yeah, I just don't know what that perceived value is. One thing it does address, though, is it does give Tesla owners slightly more freedom in terms of their route selection. So if you know Interstate 5 and Kettleman City are going to be backlogged with Teslas, and there's going to be an hour and a half wait just to get to a charger, well, sure, you can take Highway 99 instead, have your choice between 20 30 different public chargers, but in particular a number of them are EVgo chargers, yeah, that makes sense. It's going to give options in terms of route selection. But again, if you had a CHAdeMO adapter and you knew how to use the public charging infrastructure anyway, well, then you'd already be using that route. So I don't know how much of a benefit it is, but we'll see. It seems to me like maybe this is one step forward and one step back all at the same time. It's a good option for Tesla owners. It's a good revenue stream for EVgo. But in terms of how it actually plays out, I'm not sure. I think most of the areas where Tesla owners would be using these chargers are areas that I make it a point not to charge in, because it's simply too inconvenient to charge in a metropolitan area with an electric vehicle. To me, that charging should be really reserved for when you're traveling, and that's where you need those chargers to be along highway routes outside of the city. And at that point, I think most of the time Tesla owners are going to prefer to use their superchargers, which are 3 times to 5 times faster than the EVgo chargers that they would have access to. So I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think of this plan for EVgo? Do you drive a non-Tesla EV and you need to charge in the city? Are you worried about your ability to access these chargers? What's your take on Tesla's refusal to offer reciprocity to non-Tesla EV owners? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and thank you for watching.